Bill and Missy Bauer with B&M Crop Consulting. We're out here evaluating our corn right now. Where we've got great growing conditions, beautiful weather, but we've just come off a lot of rain in the last 13 days. So now do we have enough nitrogen to finish this crop off? And we really want to come out and evaluate what do we have to do to determine if we have enough N out here.
Right, so our concern is big denitrification events, big leaching events have happened, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of rain over the last 13 days, depending on where you're at in the state. When we get that much rain, if your soils are saturated like that, if we got soils that got water sitting, just saturation, denitrification-wise, you can lose up 60% of your nitrogen in 3 days. Right. when we're warm, and we're certainly warm, 75, 80 degree temps. That's the type of losses that you can see.
3 to 5 days, you can lose 60 to 80% of your nitrogen, and when you're sitting in a bad position, we've got great growing conditions, good moisture now, but we don't have enough N to finish the crop, and that's what we're out here trying to evaluate.
So we don't want to walk away from this crop. What we need to do next week, as things get a little bit drier, we can get back out into the fields, we want to pull some nitrate tests. So nitrate tests need to be pulled 1 foot deep, and that's really critical. It's a different soil probe than your normal one for soil testing. It's one that's going to be longer to get us a full foot. Now, if you've already side dressed, so you have banded nitrogen out there, which probably the majority of us do, we need to make sure that we pull uniform across the row. So we have just a little board that's our template. Our first hole is in the row, and then we got 5 holes going across to put us back in the row on the other side. So we want to make sure it's uniform as we go across there, knowing that one's in the middle. We should hit that band with one of them and not the other ones. We are staying away from the starter fertilizer band. Now, if you've just broadcast your nitrogen, you don't have anything banded, then you can just pull your cores random, just stay out of the starter fertilizer band. Once you get ready to pull these, you can't let these samples sit around. We got to get them into the lab right away. So you pull them in the morning, UPS them out that same day, or drive them to the lab if your lab is close to get the nitrate analysis done.
And it's important to tell your lab what depth you pulled those samples at, because they're going to do the calculation based on the parts per million of nitrates, or we can even take ammonia test, how many parts per million ammonia we have in the soil right now, because some of that nitrate may have been converted already.
Right, so make sure we're pulling them at that foot, let your lab know it's at that foot. When you get the information back, then what are we looking for? If you get your numbers back and you're in that 10, 12, 13 parts per million of nitrate, that's not going to be enough to get us through the rest of the season here.
A lot of times those are baselines of which the microbes need to sustain life. So we got to make sure we're 25, 30 plus, depending on what you've put on so far and what your yield goals are, to make sure we have enough to finish this crop off.
So you get your numbers back, they're not good enough. Now what are we going to do? We're going to go in here and do some supplemental nitrogen. Maybe it's 30, 40, 50, 60 units, depending on what your numbers are saying. We've got to decide how much extra to put on. How are we going to do that? If it's, in this case, we're already at V9, V10 corn, we're going to be able to come in with Y drops. We're going to maybe look at aerial application with an airplane with urea and AMS, or we could maybe a high clearance dry spreader as well. So there's a lot of options to put nitrogen on. The key is we cannot walk away from this crop.
A lot of us are setting on the best crop we've seen in a lot of years with the sunlight we've had and the growing conditions we've had prior to when the rain started. We're setting really good, so we just got to make sure we can finish this off. Now on the other side of that, some of us may have got, that corn was growing so fast, we may not have got all our nitrogen on. Now we're in an emergency situation. We've got to be able to evaluate what can we do to get corn or nitrogen on our corn as quick as possible.
Right, so maybe you're a planned Y drop situation. Right. So you weren't going to come in till you got to V7 corn, and all of a sudden now in 2 weeks you haven't been able to get there, now you got V10 corn.
Right, have you weatherproofed your corn with a nitrogen program? Are you only setting on 30 units of N applied? Is it 50, 120? Those things make a lot of difference of how big this emergency is.
So I'm very concerned about what we call gap in the nitrogen in these Y drop programs. If you haven't got your rest of your nitrogen on, it's going to have to be something to do it as soon as possible. So if you can't get into your fields with your Y drop, maybe you do need to have an airplane come in, right, get a little bit on there, then come back in when we can get across the fields with the Y drops.
We've done that in some of the plots. How many bushels? We're looking at a lot of bushel loss.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get a 25, 30 bushel hit from what we call gap in the nitrogen, letting it run out. You add it later, but when it runs out in between there, it's a big issue. Yeah. So our key here is get out into your fields. Once they get dried up a little bit, get these nitrates pulled, see where you're at. Don't walk away from this crop. We got a lot of yield potential this year. We've got good moisture now to help us carry us through into that pollination time frame. So let's make sure nitrogen's not a yield limiting factor.